The crowd's roar was deafening. Alien faces, many unfamiliar and bizarre, filled the high-tech bleachers surrounding the bloodstained arena. Their eyes glowed with excitement as they awaited the hunt. Below them, Sophia stood, trembling, surrounded by the sounds of clanking metal and grating alien tongues. She could feel the weight of 1,000 gazes, all eager for her blood. Her heart raced as her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. The sunless sky above the arena glared down, revealing no escape. Sophia's palms were slick with sweat, and her legs wobbled, not from the physical exertion, but from the sheer terror that gnawed at her from within. She had been thrown into this pit without warning, a human girl from a colony so small it was barely a footnote in the galaxy's endless scroll of conquests. Now, she was a spectacle, prey, a toy for the amusement of alien creatures who could tear her apart with ease. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had been on her way to school when their ships appeared in the skies, looming like predatory shadows. One moment she was surrounded by the comforting hum of Earth's daily rhythm, and the next she was ripped from her world and thrown into a nightmare she could never have imagined. Her mind struggled to comprehend the reality around her. The loud thud of a gate opening snapped her out of her daze. She swallowed hard as her eyes instinctively shifted to the monstrous beast that had just entered the arena. A hulking, six-armed creature stalked toward her, its crimson skin glistening under the harsh lights of the arena. Its jaw was lined with rows of jagged teeth, and its eyes glowed an unsettling yellow, fixated solely on her. The crowd above howled in delight. They weren't here for a fight, they were here for a massacre. Sophia had no weapons, no armor, no training. She was nothing but an insignificant human, standing in the middle of a bloodthirsty arena, surrounded by the deadly combatants of 1,000 worlds. And yet, it was her name that had been called, her name that was broadcasted across the galaxy as the prey for this spectacle. As the creature drew closer, Sophia's pulse quickened, her instincts screaming for her to run, but her feet remained rooted to the ground. She had no plan. She had no escape. All she could do was wait for the inevitable. The beast lunged. Its 6 limbs moved with terrifying speed, its claws reaching for her in a blur. Without thinking, her body reacted. She dropped to the ground, her hands scrambling for purchase as the creature's massive arms swooped over her. The sharp sting of air rushing past her ear was all she heard before her own reflexes took over. She rolled to the side just in time, narrowly avoiding the creature's crushing blow. Sophia didn't know how she did it. It was as if her body had learned to move without her mind's guidance, guided by sheer survival instinct. Her breath was ragged, but she wasn't dead yet. She forced herself to rise to her feet, her legs shaky but determined. The crowd's cheers were a blur in her ears, their alien voices turning into a dull hum. All she could focus on was the creature's next move. It wasn't just an animal, it was intelligent. Its movements were calculated, its eyes tracking her every shift. It knew she was weak, knew she was terrified. The arena was its home, its domain. This was where it thrived, where it was the king of the hunt. And she was its prey. But something deep inside her stirred, a flicker of defiance in the pit of her stomach. Was she truly nothing more than a helpless human, thrown to the wolves? No. She wasn't going to let it end like this. She wasn't going to be just another casualty in this cosmic circus. As the beast roared, its claws slashing toward her again, Sophia made a choice. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't cower. She would fight. The crowd fell silent for a moment, sensing the change in her. There was something about her now, something fierce, that hadn't been there before. The arena would not be her tomb. She would make it her battleground. Sophia's pulse still thundered in her chest as she crouched low, the smell of sweat and blood thick in the air. The arena had grown quiet almost expectantly, as she faced the monstrous creature that had nearly torn her apart. But it wasn't fear that now clouded her mind. It was something else, something raw and instinctual. The beast, its yellow eyes narrowing, hesitated for just a moment, as if recognizing the change in her. It knew she was no longer just a frightened girl. It didn't know what she was becoming, but it could sense the shift, the unfamiliar edge to her movements. The crowd around them roared again, a mix of amusement and curiosity. They were watching a spectacle, but what they didn't know was that they were about to witness the first spark of something that had never been seen before. The creature lunged again, but this time Sophia was ready. She sidestepped with a fluidity that felt unnatural. Her muscles, once shaky and unsure, now felt poised, controlled. In the blink of an eye, her hands found a jagged piece of broken metal lying in the dirt. She gripped it tight, her fingers aching from the pressure, but it didn't matter. The makeshift weapon gave her focus. As the beast swung its claws in a deadly arc, Sophia moved with precision, ducking beneath its strike and thrusting the shard of metal forward into the soft spot under its ribcage. The creature howled, staggering backward as the metal sank deep into its flesh. Blood oozed from the wound, and the air around them stank of death. The crowd gasped in shock, their reactions mixed with a tinge of disbelief. They had expected her to fall, to be crushed beneath the creature's strength. But she had fought back, and in that brief moment, something in the arena changed. The creature snarled, clutching at its wound, but it was too slow. Sophia moved faster now, driven by an adrenaline she hadn't known she possessed. She ducked under its massive arm, using its own momentum against it. She twisted, slamming the creature's head into the ground with all the force she could muster. It let out a final, defeated growl before it lay still, its massive form crumpled on the arena floor. The silence that followed was deafening. For a long moment, nobody moved. The crowd seemed stunned by what had just unfolded before them. Sophia stood over the body of the beast, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, her body covered in sweat and blood. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. She had done it. She had survived. Then, from the edge of the arena, a voice rang out, breaking the stillness. "Well done, human," it said, cold and deliberate. The tone was smooth, almost too calm for the circumstances. Sophia whipped her head around, her eyes narrowing as she tried to locate the source. The figure that emerged from the shadows was tall and imposing, his body covered in armor that gleamed in the harsh lights of the arena. His alien features were sharp and angular, his eyes glowing faintly with an otherworldly hue. Hroth. The name echoed in her mind, a name she had heard whispered among the slaves and gladiators in the days leading up to the battle. He was a warrior, a gladiator of legend, undefeated in the arena. He walked toward her with deliberate steps, his gaze fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. "You have potential," he said, his voice low but strong. "I didn't think you'd last this long. But now I see that there's something about you, something I can work with." Sophia's mind raced. Karath had been a champion, someone who had fought and killed his way to the top. She had just defeated a creature that no one in the arena had expected her to survive. But what did that mean? Was this just another game to him? Or was there something more to his words? "I don't need your help," she replied, her voice hoarse but firm. She stood her ground, despite the pounding ache in her body, despite the blood and sweat that clung to her skin. "I can't take care of myself." Karatha's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "You think you can? You're strong, stronger than I thought. But strength alone won't keep you alive in this place. You'll need more than that." Sophia's chest tightened, and her mind spun with confusion and doubt. The arena had shown her its brutality, but it had also revealed something inside herself, something she hadn't known existed. The girl who had been thrown into this hell was no longer the same. The question was, what would she do with this newfound strength? Karath stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you want to survive, you'll need to learn. I'll show you how." Sophia didn't trust Karath. How could she? She had learned the hard way that trust in this alien arena was a luxury no one could afford. She had seen fighters form alliances only to be betrayed when the time was right, when the stakes were higher, and survival depended on it. But there was something about Karatha's eyes, something behind that unsettling calm, that told her he wasn't just another predator in this deadly game. After the battle, he had insisted on following her back to the cell she was kept in, an underground cage where the arena's combatants were stored like cattle before their next fight. Sophia didn't want to go back there, didn't want to be reminded of the helplessness that had gripped her when she first arrived. But she had no choice. The guards would return soon, dragging her back to face another round in the arena, another monster to kill or be killed. Karath, however, didn't follow the usual routine. The guards ignored him as he walked beside her, his tall, imposing frame an odd contrast to her own smaller, human figure. They didn't challenge him, and that told Sophia everything she needed to know. He was different. He had earned his place here, not just through combat, but through sheer force of will. When they reached her cell, Karath turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Do you know why they throw you into the arena?" he asked, his voice low, almost too calm. "It's not for sport. It's not to entertain. It's to break you." Sophia crossed her arms, leaning against the cold, stone wall. "I'm not broken." Karath studied her for a moment, his gaze penetrating. "You're not. But they're going to try to break you anyway. Every fight, every kill, they'll wear you down. And when they think you've reached your limit, that's when they'll send something worse. Something you can't beat." She stiffened at the thought of it, the endless cycle of pain and survival. She had already been through one fight, one that she never expected to survive. And now, she was expected to fight again, only to face something more dangerous? It was a terrifying thought. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But there's more to you than they realize. You're not just a human girl. You have instincts, Sophia. The kind that no one else in this arena possesses. The kind that makes you a weapon. I can show you how to use them." Sophia's mind raced, her heart pounding at the thought of being trained by someone like Karath. He was a legend here, a fighter whose name was whispered in fear. His victories were countless, his strength unmatched. Could she really learn from him? Could she become someone like him? "Why would you help me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Karatha's expression softened just slightly, his eyes momentarily betraying a hint of something. "Regret, perhaps? Because I see something in you. Something I didn't see in myself when I first came here. You remind me of the warrior I used to be." Sophia wasn't sure what to make of that. Karath was a champion, a fighter who had taken countless lives. Yet, something about his words seemed genuine, as if there was a part of him that had once been like her, lost, afraid, desperate to survive. "I didn't ask for this," she muttered, looking away, her thoughts tumbling in a whirlwind. "I just want to go home. I just want to survive." Karath nodded slowly, his gaze unblinking. "I understand. But survival here isn't just about living another day. It's about fighting to stay in control. If you want to make it out of this alive, you need to become something they fear. You need to make them afraid of you." Sophia felt a spark of something deep within her, an ember of defiance that refused to be snuffed out. She had been afraid. She had been weak. But not anymore. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Teach me." Karatha's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Good. I'll show you how to fight like they've never seen before." Over the next few days, Karath worked with her, showing her techniques that were brutal, efficient, and lethal. He taught her how to read her opponents, how to anticipate their movements before they even made them. He pushed her beyond what she thought was possible, forcing her to embrace the instincts that had always been buried beneath her fear. By the end of the week, Sophia was no longer the girl who had been thrown into the arena. She was becoming something else, a force, an unstoppable presence in a world that had once seemed too large, too dangerous for her to survive. And for the first time since she had been ripped from her life on Earth, she felt the fire of purpose burning within her. The arena had made her its prey. But now, She was ready to turn the tables. Sophia's transformation was no longer a subtle shift. It was becoming undeniable. The girl who had entered the arena a mere week ago, trembling and desperate to survive, was now moving with a lethal grace that shocked even herself. The training Karath had pushed her through had been grueling, designed to strip away her fears and replace them with something far more dangerous: instinct, calculation, and ruthlessness. The first time she faced an opponent after her training was a brutal reminder of the arena's unforgiving nature. The creature that stood before her now was a towering, scaly being with 4 muscular arms and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. Its body was covered in shimmering green scales that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. This wasn't just another beast. It was a predator, a seasoned fighter who had killed more times than Sophia cared to count. The moment the horn sounded to signal the start of the battle, the creature lunged. But this time, Sophia was ready. Her feet didn't stumble as she darted to the side. Her hand shot out, grabbing a nearby jagged rock and hurling it with deadly accuracy at the creature's exposed face. It didn't kill it, but the force of the impact stunned it long enough for her to move in. She didn't hesitate. Her body seemed to know what to do without thinking. Her elbow slammed into the creature's side, using its own momentum against it. And then she twisted around, slashing with a shard of metal she had kept hidden in her hand. The blade caught the creature across the chest, leaving a deep gash that sprayed blood across the sand. The crowd roared with approval, their cheers echoing through the arena as the creature reeled back. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned the rules of the arena, and she had learned to use them. She knew when to strike, when to retreat, and when to wait for her opponent to make the first mistake. The creature roared in pain, but it wasn't finished. It lunged again, its claws swiping through the air in a vicious arc. Sophia dodged, but this time she didn't just evade. She struck back. Her legs swept under the creature's knees, bringing it crashing to the ground. And before it could recover, she was on top of it, slamming her blade into its throat. The arena fell silent for a moment. The creature's body went limp, its life snuffed out in an instant. Sophia stood over it, breathing hard, her chest heaving. The familiar sensation of victory surged through her veins, but it wasn't the elation she had once imagined. It was a cold, sharp sense of accomplishment, as though she had simply completed a task that needed to be done. The blood on her hands no longer repulsed her. It was just a part of the process, a necessary element of survival. The crowd erupted into cheers, but this time, Sophia barely registered the noise. Her mind was already calculating her next move, already scanning the arena for her next challenge. She was no longer just surviving. She was becoming the predator. She was the one who was feared now. Karath was among the crowd, his gaze sharp and focused. He had been watching her every move, studying her like a hawk. When the fight ended, he met her in the tunnels beneath the arena, where the gladiators waited between rounds. His expression was unreadable as he approached. "You did well," he said, his voice low. "But that's only the beginning. You're becoming something they'll never expect. But don't let it go to your head. This place is filled with enemies. You'll face creatures far worse than that one. You'll need to stay ahead of them." Sophia nodded, wiping the blood from her face with the back of her hand. Her fingers felt cold, but it wasn't fear that made her hands shake. It was the power that surged through her. The power that she was beginning to understand, that she was learning to harness. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the exhaustion she felt. "I won't stop until I'm the last one standing." Karath looked at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "You're not just fighting for your life anymore. You're fighting for something bigger. This arena, it's not just a place for killing. It's a testing ground for something much darker. The longer you stay alive, the more you'll learn about what's really going on." Sophia's curiosity flared, but she didn't ask. Karath had already said more than he usually did. She knew that there were things happening in the arena, things that were beyond her comprehension. But one thing was certain, whatever the truth was, it wouldn't stop her. She was done being the prey. Now, she was the hunter. The air in the arena was thick with anticipation. For the first time since Sophia had been thrown into this hellish circus, she felt something stir inside her that wasn't just survival. It was the thrill of the hunt. The Battle Royale was an event unlike any other. Gladiators from all corners of the galaxy were gathered in the massive, circular arena, each one a fierce predator in their own right. There were no rules, no alliances, just bloodshed and chaos. And this time, Sophia was among them. Karath had trained her relentlessly for this moment. She had learned to move like a shadow, to strike like a serpent, and to read the air with the precision of a seasoned warrior. But this was different. This wasn't a simple fight against one opponent. This was a battle for dominance, and only one would survive. The horns sounded, its deep, resonating blast, signaling the start of the bloodbath. Sophia's heart raced, but her mind was clear. She had been in the arena before, but this was the true test, the moment where everything she had learned would be put to the ultimate trial. The first few moments were pure chaos. Alien warriors, many of them towering, armored behemoths, rushed toward one another with lethal intent. The sound of clashing weapons, snarls of rage, and screams of pain filled the air as gladiators turned on each other, seeking dominance. Sophia ducked into the shadows, letting the madness unfold around her. She had learned long ago that the best way to survive wasn't to charge headfirst into the fray. It was to wait, to watch, and to let the others destroy themselves. Her eyes scanned the battlefield, taking in the chaotic movements of her opponents. There was the towering Thrak, a brute with 4 muscular arms and thick, armored skin. Nearby, the agile Zanara, a sleek, feline-like alien with retractable claws, moved with deadly grace. But none of them had her focus. She had her eyes on the one opponent she knew she had to defeat to win this battle, the reigning champion of the arena, Zor'th. Zor'th was a monster of legend, a fighter so skilled that he had been undefeated for over a decade. His reputation had preceded him, and the crowd was as eager to see him fall as they were to watch the carnage unfold. His massive frame was adorned with jagged armor, his face hidden behind a menacing helmet. He stood tall in the center of the arena, waiting, watching, as if daring anyone to challenge him. Sophia knew the odds were against her. Zor'th was stronger, faster, and more experienced. But there was one thing he didn't know about her. She had nothing to lose. As the other gladiators continued to clash, Sophia moved silently, weaving through the chaos with the skill of a ghost. Her steps were calculated, her every movement deliberate. She had no interest in the other fights. She had one goal, and she would not let anything distract her from it. When she finally closed the distance between herself and Zor'th, the battle seemed to slow down. The roar of the crowd faded into the background, and all that remained was her and him. She had only one shot. Zor'th turned just as she launched herself at him, her body moving in a blur. She twisted around him, narrowly avoiding the sweep of his sword. He was fast, but she was faster. She dove beneath his strike, her knife flashing in the light as she aimed for his exposed side. But he anticipated the move, spinning around and knocking her to the ground with a brutal kick. The impact was jarring, but Sophia didn't hesitate. She rolled, coming back to her feet in one fluid motion, her eyes never leaving her target. Zor'th swung again, this time with a vicious overhead blow, but Sophia was ready. She dropped low, sliding beneath him, and delivered a savage strike to his leg. The blade sank into his armor with a satisfying crunch, but it wasn't enough to bring him down. Zor'th howled in pain, but his fury only made him more dangerous. He swung again, faster this time, and the blow landed. Sophia felt the edge of his sword graze her side, the sharp sting of pain flaring up her body. Blood seeped from the wound, but she ignored it. The crowd roared, but she focused only on him. She had no time for doubt. She had no time for fear. This was her moment. She had trained for this. With a grunt, she surged forward, using her small frame to her advantage, ducking under his next strike and driving her knife into the weak point of his armor, the joint at his elbow. The blade sank deep, and Zar'kon staggered back, his arm useless. Before he could recover, Sophia launched herself forward, twisting his arm behind him and using her legs to force him to the ground. The crowd was silent for a moment as they watched the unthinkable unfold. Zar'kon struggled beneath her, but it was too late. With a final twist, Sophia's knife found its mark, straight through the vulnerable gap in his helmet. Zar'kon's body went still, and the arena erupted in deafening cheers. Sophia stood over him, panting, her body covered in blood, her eyes locked on the crowd. She had done it. She had killed the legend. She had become the apex predator. But in the back of her mind, one thought lingered. This was just the beginning. The arena fell silent as Zar'kon's lifeless body lay sprawled across the sand. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, everything stood still. Then the crowd erupted, their voices a cacophony of disbelief and excitement. It wasn't just the defeat of a champion that had shocked them. It was the realization that a human, a mere human had ended his reign. Sophia stood over him, breathing heavily, her hand still gripping the knife that had ended the life of the greatest gladiator in the galaxy. The weight of what she had just done settled on her like a heavy cloak. She had expected the adrenaline rush of victory, the thrill of killing her enemy, but instead, a strange emptiness began to creep in. The fight was over, but the war had only just begun. As the deafening cheers reverberated through the arena, Sophia took a step back, her eyes scanning the crowd. Her mind was already calculating, already moving ahead. She couldn't let herself get distracted by the noise, by the spectacle she had just become. Her victory over Zar'kon was not the end. It was merely the beginning of something much larger. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The tide was shifting. "Human," came a voice from the stands, cold and authoritative. It was one of the arena's overseers, a tall, reptilian alien with red, glistening scales. "You've proven yourself, but you have no idea what you've just unleashed." Sophia's eyes narrowed. She had heard rumors, whispers in the dark corners of the arena, about the true purpose of these fights. It wasn't just about blood sport. It wasn't just about entertaining the masses. There was something more insidious going on here. And now, she had attracted the attention of powers far beyond the arena's bloodstained walls. "You've killed our champion," the overseer continued, his voice dripping with venom. "But you've only proven one thing. Humans are more dangerous than we thought." Sophia said nothing. She didn't need to. The overseer's words were enough to confirm the truth that Korath had hinted at. This was more than a gladiatorial contest. This was a breeding ground for warriors, a place where the strongest fighters in the galaxy were gathered for a much darker purpose. The real battle, it seemed, was still to come. The overseer's gaze flicked to the other gladiators in the arena. There were still hundreds of them, each one a fierce competitor in their own right. But none of them had her focus. None of them had what she had, the drive, the hunger to survive and conquer. She had defeated Zar'kon, but that was just a stepping stone. The real challenge was coming, and she was ready for it. Korath's words echoed in her mind. "You're not just fighting for your life anymore. You're fighting for something bigger." The crowd continued to cheer, but the applause felt hollow now. Sophia turned away from Zar'kon's body, walking toward the center of the arena. She felt the eyes of every being in the stands on her, some full of admiration, others of fear. She was a new force in this world, a wild card that no one had expected. As she made her way toward the exit, the overseer called out to her once more. "You think you won? You think the arena's bloodshed ends with Zar'kon? You've killed one champion, but there are many more waiting in the wings. And if you think you've earned freedom, you're mistaken. There are powers here that you can't even begin to comprehend." Sophia didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed on the future now. She had already killed a legend. She had survived the worst the arena had thrown at her. And now, she was ready to take on whatever came next. As she stepped into the dark tunnel that led to the gladiator cells, Korath was waiting for her. His expression was unreadable as he studied her. He had seen her grow, had watched her evolve from a frightened girl into a fierce predator. But even he knew that the real war was still ahead. "You've made your mark," Korath said, his voice low. "But there are forces at play here that you can't imagine. The arena is just the beginning. If you want to survive, you'll need to learn more. You'll need to be more than just a warrior. You'll need to be a leader." Sophia paused, meeting his gaze. She had no illusions about what it would take to truly win this war. She had killed Zorith, but that had been personal. The next battles would be different. She wouldn't be fighting just for her own survival. She would be fighting for something much larger. "I'll lead," she said, her voice steady, her resolve firm. "And I'll win?" As the doors to the arena closed behind her, Sophia felt a surge of purpose, an unshakable certainty that she was destined for something far greater than the arena. She had survived, but now she had a new mission: to uncover the dark forces pulling the strings in the shadows and destroy them, piece by piece. The rise of the human predator had only just begun.